Hello, New Prospect. Welcome to RTB 2021 for October the 22nd, 2021. Hope you're doing well today. So our text for today, we have 2 Kings 3, 1 Thessalonians 3, tracking right along with those two books. And then we have Daniel 7, a text we can spend quite a bit of time on, and then Psalm 114 and 115. So why don't we start with the two Psalms? By the way, I didn't mention this yesterday, but Psalm 113 going through Psalm 118 is something known as the Egyptian Hallel. Hallel means just praise God in Hebrew, and these are praise psalms that were recited, sung during Passover traditionally, and you see the emphasis in these texts on God's role in delivering the Israelites, God's power over all things in the created order, God's incomparability, the falseness of other gods, many themes that we would see in the Exodus and subsequently in the Passover, seen in these texts as well. And then, of course, inviting us to praise God for that. Psalm 114 is a shorter version of this. Talks about how Israel went forth from Egypt, house of Jacob, from a people of a strange language. I love how it's characterizes Judah as God's sanctuary and Israel as his dominion. This is interesting because this is the same way in which the New Testament presents the church. Of course, Judah and Israel would be the people of God in the Old Testament, and this was the place in which God, it's his temple, his place of rule. And we talked about how when we were talking about Ezekiel a few days ago, that last temple image. Of course, the temple imagery in the Old Testament is mainly fulfilled in the person of Christ, but it's also fulfilled in the people of God. And it's interesting that the Old Testament has that idea as well, that God, the place of God's presence, where his presence is manifested, and it's where his rule is manifested, is in God's people, both in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament church. It's interesting here in Psalm 114. Psalm 115 is a beautiful psalm. It's one that, of course, we actually made into, as many of these psalms, we've made it into a praise chorus, not to us, but to your name be glory. You probably recognize that one. Why? Because of his loving kindness and truth, his chesed and its emeth, those two words that we've seen over and over again that really describe God's covenant faithfulness to his people and to his promises, to his covenant promises, everything that characterizes God summarized in those two characteristics in the Old Testament. And of course, when we get to the New Testament, we've talked about this before, how Jesus himself is the one who was full of, John 1, full of grace and truth, those same words here, loving kindness and truth. And then, of course, you have this wonderful picture of God's incomparability, that he is not like these idols who are silver and gold, work of men's hands, that have mouths and eyes and ears, noses and hands, all the things of humankind, but can't do anything with them. They are created. I love this phrase in verse 8, those who make them will become like them, everyone who trusts in them. In other words, you become like what you worship. And that's a pretty good rule for us too, isn't it? So if we trust in God, hopefully that's going to mold us and shape us into the image of Christ. So some good text here in Psalm 114, 115. Let's move on to, what shall we go to next? Why don't we go over to Second Thessalonians 3. We'll finish up that text. So Paul, ending as he usually does with some final exhortations, he prays or exhorts them to pray for them. So Paul has prayed for them. He's asking the church at Thessalonica, to pray for him. And specifically for the word of the Lord to spread rapidly. It's interesting that it's the word of the Lord to spread rapidly, right? So it's the message of the gospel that goes forth, that brings forth that fruit, that brings forth the harvest. It's not just the people of God going forth, but it's the people of God who are spreading the message of God that spreads. That's the essential part of mission, right? And it ultimately, missions should result in that God be glorified. So John Piper is famous for saying in his great book, Let the Nations Be Glad, that missions doesn't exist because the glory of God does not. That we participate in missions so that more and more people will give glory to God. And we see that in Second Thessalonians 3:1. Paul also deals with the problem of once again we saw this back in First Thessalonians. He's dealing with the problem of idleness, of laziness on the part of the people. Talks about how those who are not willing to work will not eat either. And basically, probably what's going on here is these two issues of idleness and eschatology are connected. That some perhaps are believing that this laziness is coming from people just kind of sitting around waiting for the second coming to happen. But Paul tells them no. In anticipation of that second coming, we need to be working, we need to be striving, we need to be proclaiming the gospel with urgency because of that fact, not despite that fact, right? So, and then he finally ends with a greeting and a blessing as well at the end of this text. So, some final exhortations, as he typically does in these letters in Second Thessalonians. And that brings us to, let's go to 2 Kings 3, another fun text in 2 Kings. Now, this text features 3 kings, or actually 4 kings. So you've got Jehoram, the son of Ahab. Then you have Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, and then you have the king of Edom here. And they are all part of this coalition who are going against the king of Moab, King Mesha, who's rebelled. Now, what's interesting about this text in chapter 3 of 2 Kings is we actually have not just this text, but we actually have the Moabite perspective. So if you look up on Google, you can look up it's called 2 names, the Moabite Stone or the Mesha Stela. Stela is just a standing stone with an inscription on it, and we have access to this that describes things from their perspective. Now, the Moabites, distant relatives of the Israelites, oftentimes fighting against the Israelites. They were also known to be what we would call henotheistic, meaning that they worshipped other gods, or they believed in many gods, but they worshipped one god kind of as their chief patron deity. It's a god named Chemosh. So we have this battle going on between Israel and Judah and Edom going in against the Moabites. And of course they go and they get Elisha to prophesy about what's going to happen. And Elisha intervenes. God intervenes through Elisha, I guess you could say. And does so, by the way, you'll notice that it's on behalf of the Davidic king Jehoshaphat here. It's it's not because of Jehoram or definitely not the king of Edom that God intervenes. And then towards the end, we have this battle going on, and we have an interesting instance here that I think shows us something of the nature of Canaanite sacrificial systems as well, or ancient Near Eastern sacrificial systems. King of Moab, this is verse 26, sees that the battle is going against him, and they take 700 men who drew swords and goes to try to break through to the king of Edom. In other words, he's going to he perhaps thinks that that's the weak point in the Israelite line, and they couldn't do it even then. And so what he does, he takes his own son, offers him as a burnt offering. So in Israel or ancient Near Eastern sacrificial views, this was a way of manipulating the gods. They viewed sacrifice as a way of manipulating the gods, a way of getting the gods on their side. And if you sacrificed your own son, man, gods are definitely going to be on your side then, right? It had nothing to do, sacrifice really had nothing to do with morality or with sin or with atonement or with substitution or any of those things. Is merely to try to coerce the gods in your favor. And in this case, probably what happens if the Moabites say, hey, if the king's willing to sacrifice his own son, surely the gods are on our side. And so they actually have this great wrath come against Israel. It's probably the Moabites themselves who are now motivated to go out and fight with renewed vigor, and the Israelites, the Jews and the Israelites and the Edomites withdraw from the Moabites because of that. So interesting account here for a number of reasons. One, it shows the nature of ancient sacrifice apart from Israel, and it also shows once again the favor that God has on the Davidic throne, and it also shows the power of the prophetic word as well. So that's 2 Kings 3. Let's go over to, so we've done 2 Kings 3, we've done 2 Thessalonians 3, and we've done Psalms 114. So that leaves us with Daniel 7. So Daniel 7, remember, it goes with Daniel 2, and they have twin themes, similar themes, where God is sovereign over the nations and over the empires that would start with Babylon and go on down to the kingdom of Rome, the empire of Rome. So remember that in Daniel 2, you've got this great colossus with the head of gold, the silver torso. Then you've got the legs of bronze, and then you've got the feet of iron and clay, and then you have that stone cut without hands that comes and destroys all those kingdoms. And of course, the kingdoms in that case represent Babylon. Persians take over from the Babylonians, Greeks take over from the Persians, Romans take over from the Greeks. Same thing goes on here. In this case, Daniel has a vision. This is not the vision of the king of Babylon in this case. It's Daniel who has a dream at night, and he sees 4 great beasts coming out from the water. Now, Daniel 7, just as a warning here, this becomes not a warning, but just as a note, this is perhaps one of the most significant texts in the Old Testament for understanding Jesus in the New Testament. Probably the most quoted passage in the New Testament when it comes to quoting Old Testament texts. And the reason is, of course, this text refers to the Son of Man, which becomes very definitive, a defining text for understanding who Jesus is. And this is how Jesus even refers to himself as the Son of Man many times. So anyway, you have these beasts coming up from the water. Water represents here the chaotic waters of history, and you've got these 4 beasts, and one is a lion with wings of an eagle, one is a bear raised up on one side, one's a leopard with 4 heads, and one's this beast he can't even describe because it's so fearful. And once again, that represents the 4 successive kingdoms to come, starting with Babylon, going down to Rome. Incidentally, if you look up the Ishtar Gate, you'll see a mural of a lion with wings of an eagle is representative of Babylon. And so then you have, of course, the bear with 2 sides that represent the Medo-Persian Empire, 2 sides of that empire. Then you have the leopard with 4 heads. Of course, leopards are fast. The Greeks under Alexander the Great take over the empire quickly, take over the world very quickly. Alexander dies, and his kingdom is divided into 4. The 4 generals under Alexander, 4 heads. And then you have finally that last beast that is so fearful is the one that can't even be described, and that's the Romans. But then what happens? Well, here's Daniel. He has this vision. He sees this Ancient of Days, of course, representative of God, who takes his seat. His vesture's like white snow. His hair is like pure wool, thrown ablaze with flames. And the court sat and the books were open. So here's God about to render judgment, right? He's about to bring final judgment on these nations. And then he keeps looking in verse 13, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man comes up to the Ancient of Days. So this is not God himself, but this is somebody like a son of man, and is presented before him. But it's coming on the clouds of heaven. So it's a man, but something of this man is divine. This is a messianic figure, because to him is given a dominion and a glory and a kingdom. So the Son of Man is given by God a kingdom, so that the nations and peoples, and peoples of every language might serve him. And his dominion will be an everlasting dominion which will not be not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Now, this is a shocking text for a Jewish audience. Why? Because here is here's this man, a human being, who, though he is ascending to God, and has some, obviously, some divine aspect to him, but is being worshipped by the nations. Again, what defines a good Jew as a monotheist is that you don't worship anything else. You worship God and God alone. Well, here is the Son of Man who's going to receive the service or the worship of the nations at the will of God. And of course, this is pointing forward to Jesus. Jesus quotes this when he's on trial. He says, the Son of Man, you'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven when he's on trial, right before he is crucified. And they cry blasphemy because they know exactly what he's claiming, that he is that Messiah. And of course, when we get to the book of Revelation, it's Jesus. These two images are actually conflated in the book of Revelation, where Jesus in Revelation 1 is the Son of Man. John turns and calls him the Son of Man, saying that he is this guy. And he's also the one who has Jesus, the Son of Man figure in Revelation 1, has the hair of wool and this white hair. It's conflating the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. Why? Because it's the Son of Man, Jesus, who will ultimately bring forth justice and judge the nations, including the nation of Rome that was currently, it's the last beast here that's currently ruling over the church in the first century. So the reason why John quotes so much from Revelation in Revelation from Daniel 7 is because they're the same situation in life for God's people. Daniel's writing to a people who are being persecuted, being ruled by a foreign power, and he's encouraging them that God has sovereignty over all the nations. You can live your life in a way that is radically devoted to God, because you know that the nations can't do anything to you. God is in control. God is sovereign over all. That's the exact same message of John in the book of Revelation. You are being persecuted, but the nations can't do anything to you, including this last beast can't do anything to you, because God is in control. He's sovereign over the nations, and he will one day bring all those nations to judgment. And so live in a radically devoted way to God because of that fact. Much more we could say on Daniel 7. That's a beautiful text, and one that obviously is very much a shaping text for understanding the Messiah and understanding Jesus's role. And so let's chew on that a little bit throughout this day, on this day, October the 22nd, 2022. Hope you have a great rest of the day.